How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law, Thomas McCoy, and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Joe Show, the special ASMR intro. Thank you, Tom. Can you say that a little louder just in case nobody heard you?
Okay, we'll go from whispering to soft-spoken. This is the ASMR special intro of the Dr. Joe Show.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. It's always...
We have Mark Stiles, who gives his all in that intro. And I got to tell you, I need to warm up first because he has a very social job where he's always schmoozing people. And I could be behind the screen all day and you'll notice the frog in my throat. So I got to do some warm-ups more often now. Next time I'll do some red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
I think that'd be great. I'm glad you told me about the frog. We won't get too hoppy about it. I was hoping you could actually introduce our guest for tonight. We can sort of maybe begin exploring that.
Absolutely, Dr. Joe. Tonight, we are honored to have Gin Hammond. Gin Hammond is an award-winning Harvard University Moscow Art Theater grad, as well as an actor, writer, director, and author of Returning the Bones, her debut historical novel, which will be released June 2023. She has performed on stage both nationally and internationally and received grants from Allied Arts, Artist Trusts, For Culture, the NEA, and others. After a decade of interviews with the main character, Gin adapted the stories into a Gypsy Rose Lee Award and Gregory Award-nominated play. Gin also works as a voice teacher, dialect coach, and voiceover artist, and is known for her work in video games such as Dota 2, Battletech, Dayton, and State of Decay. Gin is a proud co-founder of MFA, a meditation app specifically for actors. It's meditationsforactors.com. She lives with her husband, son, cat, and chickens in Bellevue, Washington. Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Thank you. I know that was a bit of a mouthful.
But there's so many fascinating things. I mean, we could spend this show just talking about that intro. I mean, Harvard and Moscow. Let me just understand a little bit about that. Tell me about that part.
Yeah, well, that's kind of a fun story because I had to hide acting from my parents, right? And so when I got accepted to Harvard, it's got a very long sub name, but yes, I called my parents and I said, so I got accepted to Harvard. And my mom said, for what?
Oh, God. Nice.
Yeah. And then I went there for 2 years. So that was in Cambridge. And then I actually graduated from the program. At that time, it was a certificate program, but we had other teachers come over from the Moscow Art Theater. I graduated, I moved to New York. A few months later, all of us get a letter saying, hey, we've officially become sister schools with the Moscow Art Theater. And this is your one-shot opportunity as an alum to come back, study in Cambridge, then go to Moscow, and then you would get an MFA. And so I thought, this is ridiculously expensive. I'm going to go, not knowing what I was going to be doing, what I was getting myself into. And it's funny, I found a journal from way back when, and pretty much every journal entry begins with, I cried again today. But, overall, after the experience, I am so, so glad that I did it. It was such culture shock, and I'm the better for it, I think.
That's incredible. What an incredible story. So, I mean, I'm fascinated by Moscow and all of that. And I mean, how do you think that's influenced, like, where you are now?
I think every time my threshold is raised for intense experiences, I can take whatever comes my way or recover from it better.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I learned there that influences me a lot now is just around language and accents and dialects and how worldview is such a huge part of learning accents and dialects, because I do spend a lot of my time as an accent and dialect coach. And until somebody gets that, it's more like as a colleague says, a dialect goiter, right? But when somebody can integrate the perspective, then they don't need to think about the musicality because it comes from the
Mhm.
worldview. And interestingly, sometimes when people have a negative association, so for example, there was an actor I was working with who we were working on an Appalachian accent, and everybody, including the casting person, thought that that should be easy because their people came from that area. But his immediate family tried so hard to create a wall between that and where they were now that it emotionally and seemingly physically pained him to take that sound on and I think understand more where his people came from.
Yeah.
It gets me emotional thinking about it because there were a
That's a,
lot of tears actually
yeah, no,
in the
that's an
process.
incredible story. I mean, our our accent, our dialect, I mean, so much of that can define us. And sometimes our parents say, don't be defined that way. I mean, in my early theater career, I had a British accent. I mean, wasn't anything other than real. I mean, I'd grown up in England and South Africa, and my
Mhm.
drama coach, Will Leach, said to me, Joe, get
Oh,
rid of the accent because you'll be typecast. And this was a long time ago. So I
yeah.
perfectly understand this. But how does this connect with what you have created now? Because Returning the Bones it's a pretty well, it's an incredibly powerful story. Tell us a bit about this and how did this happen?
Yeah. Boy, there are a few questions in there.
Absolutely.
um, let's see. How did it happen? So when I was in my 20s, living in Minnesota at that time, I grew up in San Diego. I was feeling somewhat natural, perhaps, degree of dissatisfaction with my immediate family. We didn't grow up anywhere near other family. There had been a couple of family visits, and that's really only my dad's side. So that's the black side of the family. My mom's side of the family disowned her. Obviously, she was white for marrying my dad. And so I didn't know them at all. And I just felt like, there's a dearth of family happening here. And my grandfather was born in 1889, and my dad was born in 32, and so few of the stories trickled down to me. I wanted to know my stories. I felt like it was sort of my birthright, which is not a word I throw around for many reasons. But so this was I started just this is the days of phone books, right? And there was no texting. So I was basically cold calling people I was pretty sure were my relatives. And that wasn't always warmly received, but I got in contact with my Aunt Carolyn, who also went by the name of Bibi. And she was absolutely welcoming. She said, sure, come on out. And that time she was living in Ohio. And so I would scrape together my pennies. I was working as an intern at a theater at that time. So we qualified for food stamps. They're like, congratulations, you're an intern now. Go down to the federal office. But so I would fly out there and I was honestly, my bar was here. I was just looking for somebody decent that I could call family. And turns out she changed my life. And she had this quality of the moment you walk in, she just accepted you for who you are, where you're at. There's this feeling of peace being around her. That was so new to me. And so I wanted more of that. And she was very humble. So that's why it took 10 years of interviews where maybe the third, fourth time I visited her, she would mention, oh, yeah, I worked a little bit with Dr. King training people to do the sit-ins at the lunch counters. Like, what? Or she'd mention escorting Eleanor Roosevelt through the Howard campus when she happened to be student body president. What? And I was getting whiplash. So maybe it's good that she meted it out over time. So
Hmm.
I had all of these stories, and I finally had stories that I felt like were mine from previous generations. And it seems like the best way to remember stories is to synthesize them and make them into something. And an opportunity came up to make a play out of it. And so I just tried my best to do that. And I'd done a South African play that was a 24 character solo show. And this one Now with new adjustments, it's now a 31 character solo show. But
Wow.
I thought, I know how to do this, and I'm going to take on everybody. And uh, and it really helped me feel close to family members who I'd never even met before, but now I feel like they're a part of me.
Wow. That's amazing story. Let's talk about the book itself. Why now?
Why now is because I feel like so many people, especially younger people, have this sense of learned helplessness from the way that the news is delivered. And I feel like when we can step back, take a look at history, understand it through the perspective of somebody who's coming up in the world, because this is in some ways a coming of age story. It's historical fiction, coming of age story. It's got magical realism, that it can show a reader, hey, you're not the first person to be overwhelmed by what the heck is going on in the world. And when this book starts, it's the Great Depression. And it takes us through World War II. That's a lot happening in about 15 or so years. So this madness that we're living through, it's not the first time. People have gotten through it, and people have gotten through it with their souls intact and with connection and love in their lives. So
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the story, just a teaser so people can get it? By the way, how do people get the book?
oh, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's an ebook, and there will be a audiobook at the end of the month, at the end of July. And it's a good thing I'm a dialect coach, because the other day when I was reading it, I was like, all right, in this one day, I've done Cameroon, Senegal, Hungarian, and Polish, let alone the Texan. What have I done to myself?
The Swiss Army
Um,
voice.
Swiss Army voice, right?
Genius,
Great.
Thomas. I'm going to write that down. Swiss Army Voice. Okay. Swiss Army Voice dialectcoaching.com. What was the question? Yeah. So that's how it's available. And
Great.
then, yeah, what did you ask
So
before
tell us
that?
a
I'm
bit about the
sorry.
story.
The story. Okay. So you could say it starts with my grandfather, again, born around 1890. And he's one of these people who, during that precious time between the sharp rise in Jim Crow and Reconstruction, he took advantage of the fact that there were 90 HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, that sprouted up in our nation, right? And so he took that education that was finally legal for him to have, and he ran with it, took as many people as he could with him. This meant that he became a doctor. He started his own hospital. He started cafes. He had rental houses. He had a lumber company because the whites wouldn't sell him any lumber. And then he had to start an appliance repair company because none of the whites would fix any of the appliances in the rental houses. I went to a family reunion for the first time. There's this whole other Hammond branch that was happening. I didn't know anything about it. Over 200 people. I found out more, that he had a what is it, doctorate of jurisprudence. He could have practiced law if he wanted to. He started dry cleaner, started nursing school, started kindergartens. Just incredible, right? So of course this made him a target for the KKK. Right? Very high profile. There were things he used as leverage to keep him and his family safe. But in the story, you have the character of Bibi destined to inherit it all and be a target of the KKK, which, she wasn't crazy about the idea of. She wanted a very small, quiet life. She wanted to rebel by being insignificant, right?
And
And
she wasn't going to inherit it. It was meant to be her brother,
it was
right?
meant to be her brother. Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
whole
And
nother sort
so,
of dimension there. But
yeah, it was a shock.
yeah,
And so her life is basically prescribed by Dr. Hammond. And then this opportunity comes up for her to flee that onerous situation, flee the Jim Crow South, finally be in a situation where she could figure out who she is so that she knows what choices are hers.
Hmm.
And in the meantime, we have this crazy cast of characters that are her family and then the people that she subsequently meets.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then she makes some pretty big decisions because her escape also shows her the parallels between the rise of Nazism and the rise of Jim Crow in a way that was undeniable. So she had to make a decision around how do you choose between your country, your people, like, you know, your community, in this case, especially the Black community, and herself, you know? When do you sacrifice your life and never know who you are? And when do you put yourself in a situation where you feel like you're alive, finally?
Hmm.
But I'm not going to tell you what she
No, good.
does.
No, but people should really get the book. It's beautifully written. And so, Tom, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Well, yeah, there's definitely parallels between Nazi Germany and Jim Crow South. One not oft heard fact is that Hitler, Jim Crow South, was his inspiration for the early stages of Nazism in Germany. Like, there was definitely a rhyme scheme.
And you say that, we've come out of it in some ways, and there's that optimism that we've survived a lot of those things, and yet they still
Yeah.
seem to be here.
Well, you just put that image in my head of Malcolm X. A reporter asks him, "Well, do you feel you may?" And he breaks his neck, going, "No, no, 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 no. If there's 9 inches of knife in my chest and you pull it out 6 inches, is that progress?
Mm.
Yeah.
You pull it out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wounds." And many are saying the knife isn't there.
Yeah.
But in this case, it is, and yet here's this human being who is resilient, who is able to, very early on, we realize how bright she is. You paint this wonderful picture of her talking with her teacher, and it's clear that she's bright. But then there's this conflict that happens that terrifies her. Without giving it away, we are still in the midst of that I think, there's no question that there is a discrepancy in how people are treated simply based on how they look.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
how do we begin addressing that? We've addressed it before. What do we do? How will this book, which is a must read, help us move that forward?
She perceives that there is an arrogance in pessimism, that you undermine yourself completely and the people around you if you give over to that completely. And she's lucky. She is very lucky in so many ways, but one of the ways in which she's lucky is that she has these elders who've been through even more than she has. One of them is her grandmother, Sarah. And there's a chance she's related to Alexander Hamilton and was sort of banished as a result. But, she saw slavery. She saw the auction blocks. She saw all of these things. And early on in the story, Bibi says that when she and her brother curl up and complain next to grandmother Sarah, she's about, say, having to go to school. Grandmother Sarah says, "At least you get an education." About milking the cows, "At least we got cows." About, getting a whooping. Then she talks about watching what families getting separated on the auction block, So when we do have a wide span of historical reference, we can see that there is progress. Is it happening at the rate at which we want? Not at all. Shaking the head like Malcolm X. No, it's not. But there is. And to see the way that some people in particular have been able to get through their lives and still feel love in their hearts, that that is winning at the game of life. You know, when you come across, when I was living in the Netherlands, a friend of mine, he was friends when he lived in San Francisco with a Holocaust survivor who was in his 90s. And that guy was one of the happiest guys in the world. And it's not because he was walking around with a thimble saying, if I get just this much, I can be satisfied. No, he was able to see the bigger picture. He put the effort in to see the bigger picture. And that also means that when you see the bigger picture and you see something happening now, you can see the potential trajectory and you know when to act, and you have perhaps more motivation to get the people around you to act, you know? So yeah, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back so often. But if you can get reminders from stories, right? And good stories hopefully give us connection and meaning. Or if you're lucky enough to have grown up with people in your life. I didn't grow up with that exactly. I mean, really, for me, it started with my Auntie Bibi.
Mm.
So in a way, it's never too late.
No, it is. I mean, you know, one of the quotes in your book, you may not see it in your lifetime, but change will come, you know.
Yeah.
That's powerful. We should definitely talk about that more. But and it has to do really with this divide that we have, that somehow we have in groups and out groups. And if you're not part of my in group, then somehow you have less value and you are more threatening and more dangerous and stigmatized.
Easily dehumanized.
Yes. Yes. And actually, that is one of the most important parts about it, is that if you think about that word, is actually very encouraging.
Go on.
Yeah. Because if the only way we can really hurt someone else is to dehumanize them, that says a lot about who we are actually as human beings. That when we see each other in the same group, we cannot hurt each other. We have to actually dehumanize in order to create that aggression. And now that we know it, I think we can use that in a positive way, because we are one group. It's called humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this book is so important for people to read. It, you know, it's allowing us, not allowing is a terrible word. It's giving the opportunity for us to look again at who we are and why we do what we do. And that is really what the I Am is about. The I Am is saying we're doing the best we can based on the influence of 4 domains: our home domain, our social domain. Those 2 domains are outside. The internal domains are our biological domain of brain and body, and the I see. How do I see myself? How do I think other people see me? So with that, here we have this story. I mean, you call it fiction, but it's not fiction, is it? It's based
in so many
on
ways, no.
very, very real things happening right now. So
Yes.
I'm curious, what's your take on why is there this conflict, this racism and bias?
Why is there racism and bias? I wonder sometimes if it simply goes back to scarcity. And I don't know where that lives. I don't know if it's way back in the basal ganglia or what. But the moment we feel a sense of scarcity, and perhaps that's because we're listening too much to certain politicians or what have you, then that seems to trigger something in us where that othering, that domino effect of othering begins. So that's what my spidey senses tell me, that it just begins at that one tiny little point. When we have a sense of abundance, we're pretty relaxed.
Right.
We want to share. I think for example, one of the most painful things about breakup, it's like that Joni Mitchell song, what am I going to do now that I have no one to give my love to, right? Because there's that spilling over and it wants to be shared. So, yeah, That's my theory. That's my tiny little theory. What do you think?
And it's right on the mark because, millions of years ago, there were these limited resources. And so we were incredibly competitive. If you had more than me, you had a greater chance of getting your genetic material into the next generation. We didn't know anything about genetic material, but that was the idea. You are going to be more, quote, successful than me. And so in a world of limited resources, that very primitive limbic survival part kicks in. Absolutely. Problem is we have a poor distribution of resources now. I don't think there's the same limitation. And that's really interesting because that's the continuation of that competition. I can't risk you having as much as me is different than saying, I need what you want. So there's the envy part, the envy, you've got more than me, right? And then there's the suspicion that you will take from me. And these
I
are
think
the
that's what
two,
makes the character of the father so dangerous to everyone around him. People want to take him out.
yeah, because he could potentially move their business away, right? He's creating his own. I'm curious, I agree with you about the abundance makes us more comfortable, but what about billionaires then?
Produce these parasites.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a good. So we had a past guest, Eli Ehrlich, who plugged the book Producers, Parasites, Patriots. And I ordered it, and man, it really gets to the heart of what you talk about, Dr. Joe, with the idea of providing value. One of the best ways to dehumanize someone is to paint them as a leech. Like the notion of the welfare queen, the takers, undeserving poor. I learned last year studying Reconstruction, the identity of the taxpayer, where it's like, this is your tax dollars, was used originally as a weapon against Reconstruction.
How was that?
So federal funding for the South, that was one of the big draws toward Hayes. So then compromise.
In 1877, compromise.
What's the easiest way to end Reconstruction than to say, hey, look what you're paying for. There's already that bias. You can just say, look, do you want your money going to them? I mean, the history of the United States is free for white people, but the second it goes towards Black people, it's no. And we'll deny ourselves what's best for us. Like in the Jim Crow South, when public pools got desegregated, they just shut them down. They'd rather have no pools than have to share them. It's wild.
Yeah.
So that was when it wasn't a limited resource, but an accessible resource that other people started to limit.
Yeah.
And that is happening today. How can this book help us right now? Because it casts a light. It's theater, right? But what do we do with it? How do we avoid feeling as powerless as Bibi did when her brother passes? She felt powerless.
Well, as it relates to the IM, this is a newer rubric to me, which I'm still digesting. But one thing that really stood out to me with I think is it the IC?
Yeah.
I think she sees herself as a murderer, and because of this, she stifles natural impulses to rebel, and she just goes along with everything that she is told to do. And anytime it starts to bubble up, she is told, look, this is what you're expected to do. And most people, I think, unless they feel crushed, they'll kind of break out of that at least a little. But she's unable to because her guilt is so huge. And so I hope one of the things that this book does is to help people stop, take a step back and go, wait a minute, what am I telling myself? And what are the limitations I'm actually placing on myself? Did they come from within me? Did they come from some talk show host I like to listen to a lot? Did it come from something I watched on Netflix, or did it come from magazines, in terms of how you perceive your gender, or how you are perceived racially, or how you perceive yourself in any of those ways? What is it that I'm telling myself? Is the world my oyster? Are there actually more choices than I can even handle, or am I just staying in a myopic place, uh, repeating the cycles that I'm in?
But there are enormous expectations of the main character as well. You
Mm.
know, how do we balance those, the expectations of others compared to what we want to do? How does she balance those?
It has to do with privilege.
About why, there's an expectation of what she will do.
Yeah, noblesse oblige. So when we realize our level of privilege, whatever that may be, wherever you are, and if you are in a position to help other people, it is going to ultimately benefit you most of the time. Of course, there are exceptions. I mean, how many civil rights leaders have been assassinated? But also, another point about this book is that it's not just the leaders themselves, it's individuals doing what they can in their community, or maybe just even within their family, doing that little thing with the intention that sets the direction, right? So I think that's how she balances that, is because she's gone out into the world, she's better able to see where she fits in the bigger picture and say, okay, this is what I can do. This is what I am capable of doing, and I'm going to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, she does a lot of amazing things. And then we won't give away the ending of the book, but it's really important to read it because it ties everything together for this particular person from the
Mm.
beginning of the book to the end. And it's beautiful the way people can change and grow. And that's what we hope for, you know.
Yeah.
One
I
of the
will
things,
say, without giving away too much, that the conflict that she has at the beginning of the book, a racially motivated act of violence, um, what happens at the end of the book is something that actually happened when
oh,
she encountered this person. They encountered each other as adults, and there was that moment of grace that happened. That was practically a transcription of what I wrote.
mm. No, it is powerful. The I am is saying that at any and every moment we can remind someone of their value.
Mm.
And whenever you remind someone of their value, you increase your own value. And that's what leads to trust. Again, without giving away the plot, what stood out is the ability for us to really be resilient in a world where there is the potential to completely crush us down. And this young woman certainly lived in that world. She had incredible role models, so she had parents who were not going to be crushed down, but were aware of what their place was, which is sad.
Mhm.
That we all have to somehow be aware that we have a certain place, and if we come out of our lane, we can get run over and hurt. But she was willing to sort of expand the lane, not just come out of it, which I think was really important. And I think it's a great message for all of us that the reality is real. There are these scary things in our world. There is bias, there's stigma, there are groups. But once we can understand it and recognize it, it doesn't have to restrict us. And you can still be kind to other people.
It is weird that we get ourselves into that weird either or mentality where it's like, well, if you acknowledge that there are inequalities and someone's thumb is on the scale, well, that means that you're just giving up, right? What? No. People who point that out historically are also doing quite a bit to address that. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a fatalist outlook.
No, not at all. And I think that, we're both theater people, and theater, takes tell and makes it show. But here, a novel like this does the opposite, and it takes show, like, here's a world, but I will tell you the story, and you now, as you're reading it, will create your own imagery about it, as opposed to seeing a show, seeing the imagery created for you, and then you go home and discuss it. So I think that you've created really the world that this woman is living in. And for me, the part that is powerful is I think we're still living in it. And we need to understand it. We need to understand who we are, why we do what we do. And I think we have a deeper understanding because, as you say, we understand about limited resources. We understand more about what it is to have this ancient, primitive limbic brain that is all about survival.
I'm trying to remember the quote from Long Day's Journey into Night, Eugene O'Neill. It's Mary, the wife, Mary Tyrone, who says, the past is the present and the future too. We try to lie our way out of it, but life won't let us. Yeah. So just that it's all connected. It's redirectable, but it's all connected.
It is. And I think we have a different understanding of why we do what we do now. I think we have a deeper understanding of this survival mechanism, but we also have a new part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part that's right behind your forehead that's responsible for solving problems, executing a plan, and anticipating what will happen next. And that's the part that we really need to count on. Because if we keep doing what we're doing, what do we really think will happen next? We'll destroy ourselves.
Would you say that recognizing our own biases is a prefrontal cortex function?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely prefrontal. Recognition is that sense, oh, now I understand. The feeling part, the limbic part, is the part that can be irrational and impulsive and emotional. It happens to be where addictions live as well, and where memory lives. It's this ancient part of our brain. But we have this new part, the prefrontal cortex. So the story, Returning the Bones, how'd you come up with that title, by the way?
Well, one of my visits to Auntie Bibi, I was rummaging around in the basement through albums and boxes and things, and I came across a small wooden box, and then I opened the box, and there were a smattering of bones in there. And, she hadn't been a surgeon in a long time. And because she was a surgeon and an OBGYN and then a psychiatrist. But I came upstairs and tenderly opened it and said, Auntie, what's this? And so she told me an aspect of the story that happens in the book, and I said, we have to get this to the Holocaust Museum right away, or someplace so the DNA can get tested. And when I was asking various doctors at that time, is this enough? And they're like, no, there's not enough to do any DNA testing. It might be different now. And so this is something I want to do this year, because that was shortly after 2000 when I was going around from place to place, and temples, I was like, so these are from this place. Can we please bury them? And they're like, they're okay. So there's a really good chance that these are Jewish bones, but we don't know for sure. So we just can't. And so part of the reason I'm telling the story is it's, gosh, I don't even know how to say it. That this is the closest I can get to giving them their due, at least until DNA testing gets better, which it might be now, I hope. I
Oh.
hope. Yeah. So that was rather startling
Yeah,
when that happened.
I mean, it ties in with one of the IM things. You know, small changes can have big effects. I mean, there is a small change just to uncover these bones, and boom, set
Yeah.
you off on this real path.
That's so much of what genealogy can be too.
Hmm.
Just finding out one little detail
Yeah.
in a family history can change how you think about yourself.
And that is again the first truth of the IM, because these four domains interconnect: the social, home, biological, and the IC. A small change in any of the domains can have a big effect. We don't need to change everything. So, Gin Hammond, what small change can you recommend to our listeners based on what we're talking about tonight?
I think one small change is to look if there's a story, let's say in the news, that is impairing your function. I think it would be good to look for precedents in the news. We're so lucky now that we have all of these search engines. I mean, you know, there so many sides to that, but if there's something that is racking our hearts, you can probably find a precedent and step back and see how did people deal with it at that time. For example, the conversation around the Spanish flu, right? When we were in lockdown, a lot of us looked to that. For how long is this going to take? So I know my husband and I, as soon as it started, we were like, you know what? Let's just mentally prepare ourselves for 2.5 years, because that's what happened then.
Right.
And a lot of people looked for stories of how people dealt with it. But one of the interesting things then was that everybody was used to losing members of their family
Mm.
to disease, to factory accidents, all of that kind of stuff. So the concepts, the framework around death is so different than what it is now. And that's something to think about, right?
Mm.
Which
I feel
can
like we're
be,
returning to tradition in that respect.
Mm.
yeah, it can be
Right.
kind of a backwards blessing, and help you understand, especially if there's a family connection, what your family survived and what you are capable of,
Yeah.
right? So I think looking for precedents.
I think that's a great idea, because it's true. We have the past. We can pull up these memories. We can learn, but that
Mhm.
has to be applied to the future.
Yeah.
So, how are we going to manage things now? But also, how do we use what we've learned before, the precedents before? So, perhaps we don't need to go down the same path. But
That too.
I mean, small changes can have big effects. You can't get much smaller than a coronavirus. So, look at that had, huge effect. So,
Yeah.
so the small change, the other small change, of course, folks, is by the book. But
Mhm.
with that in mind, the second truth of the IM is everyone has one.
Mhm.
Everyone is doing the best they can and is interested through their IC domain in what you think or feel about them, which has an effect on their biological domain, because it feels different when you feel respected or disrespected.
Mm.
And you're part of someone's home or social domain. So the second truth of the IM, you control no one, but you influence everyone. And you get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Gin Hammond, author of Returning the Bones. What kind of influence do you want to be?
I hope that through this story and through I'm such an actor, I get so verklempt that this story living in them, that there can be a ripple effect of that sense of peace, that sense of grace that I felt when I first encountered my aunt, and that I continued to encounter. And recently, as I've gone through things again, um, there was a video, that hours of video. So I was looking for one thing, but I came across this, and it is a poem from her grandmother, Sarah, who had grown up a slave. And this prayer was from us, the desire to condemn other folk. Give to us eyes to see the good in everyone we meet.
Mm.
And that is what she lived by.
Yeah.
So I hope that so
So what you just said, seeing the good
Uh-huh.
in everyone,
yeah.
that is exactly the I am.
Mm.
The I am is saying, let's look at each other and try to understand why we do what we do based on the influence of the domains
Mhm.
without judging it. Let's look again at who we are and why we do what we do. And you take those words, look again, and reverse them. Again, look. Again, to repeat something, look like a spectator. Let's
Mhm.
respect who we are and why we do what we do. When is the last time you got angry at someone treating you with respect?
Yeah.
Right? So that's it. So that's why, when Janet, we should give Janet a shout out, your publicist, when she contacted me and told me a bit about the story, I really wanted you to come on the show because I think it's time. We have an opportunity in this world that we are in right now
Mhm.
to look again at other people without doing to them what they may be doing to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's look again and understand it. And you're right. It is about this perception of somehow a limited resource.
Mhm.
But we don't have to do that anymore. We got
Yeah.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we're not all living on Alone, the Netflix series,
That's
it's
right.
a
That's
different
right.
situation.
That's
Yeah.
right. So I really appreciate the conversation. Tell us once again how we get the book.
You can purchase Returning the Bones on Amazon, and I think today's an Amazon Prime Day, and at least today is. And you can find it on Barnes and Noble.
That's great. So folks,
Yeah.
pick it up. Returning the Bones by Gin Hammond. It's a great read. Gin, thanks so
Thank
much for being here tonight with us on the Dr. Joe Show. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Honor and a pleasure.
Tom, we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marilyn Monroe swallowed the pill. Did she do it for love or was she tired of the thrill?